Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
All right, well, welcome. Thanks for the few of you here in person and those of you online on ResNet. It's a great privilege and honor to be able to introduce and host Dr. Milan Tambe from University of Southern California. Thankfully, he has his title up here on the slide because he has quite possibly the longest professorial title in the USC system, for sure. He's the Helen N. and Emmett H. Jones Professor in Engineering. And I'm not going to run through his long list of accomplishments, but what strikes me from his bio is the number of awards that he's won just in raw total, but also the diversity of domains that he's won them in, everything from engineering research to community service, societal impact, and also teaching, which is awards that professors rarely get, but should be rightfully honored when they do so. So Dr. Tambe has had a long and illustrious career primarily in the world of security games and game theory as applied to security games. He's worked with all sorts of government agencies, municipalities, to help make ports, oceans, cities safer. But recently, and the reason I was really excited to have him here at Microsoft Research is his thinking around green security games. So the way that we can take game theory and traditional security game approaches and start thinking about how we can deploy people in the real world to help protect natural resources, whether that's fisheries, wildlife, forestry, things like that. So that's going to be the topic of Milan's talk today, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for people who are here and people who may be watching online. But we'll keep this informal, and so please feel free to interrupt me. And we have what, about till 11:30, something like that? Yeah. Okay. So the work I'm going to describe, overall security games, is joint work with a number of current and former PhD students and postdocs. And two of them, current students, are here, Fang. I'm showing her over here, and Thine Nguyen. So this is a picture of our current group. So I'm going to jump right into the topic, which is security. So we know that we face globally challenges of security for protecting our ports and airports, interdicting the illegal flow of drugs, weapons, and money, suppressing urban crime. Now, in all of these cases, we have limited security resources, and how to optimize the use of limited resources, something that we've been building decision aids for security agencies. More recently, we've been taking some of these techniques and applying them for security of forests, fish, and wildlife, and this is what we've been referring to as green security. So the commonality in all of these domains, in all of these challenges, is that we have limited resources, a lot of things to protect, and a watchful adversary who can monitor our defenses and exploit any patterns. So how do you schedule or plan or allocate limited resources taking into account this watchful adversary? And we've been appealing to game theory, and in particular this notion of Stackelberg security games. And so in this talk, I will briefly introduce Stackelberg security games. I'll then start talking about infrastructure security. This is mainly to give an introduction to some of the work that we've done in the past. And so the first 10 minutes for Stackelberg security games, next 5 minutes or so for infrastructure security. And the bulk of the talk will be focused on introducing green security. This is an exciting and important area for research. So I'll outline some of the applications as well as some of the challenges we face. And then finally, PAWS, which is a protection assistant for wildlife security, a decision aid that we've been building. And so I know Faye and Thine, who are here, have heard this talk like 100 times before. And so, if you want to check your email or something, that's fine. But hopefully you'll be able to answer questions from the audience that is here. So Lucas, we were talking yesterday about AAAI and Ichikai papers and all these sorts of things. I went back and checked how many papers on security games we've published just as our own group. And so depending on how you count, so there's like 60 to 70 papers over the last 8 years in security games. And so I'm going to just sort of give highlights of some of this. Green security is a very new topic for us, and we haven't published as much though. So let's begin by talking about Stackelberg security games. And so I'm going to introduce this game using a 2x2 example where we have the US Coast Guard trying to protect a toy port of 2 targets, targets 1 and 2. Target 1 happens to be more important than target 2. If as a result the Coast Guard are always at target 1, an adversary conducting surveillance will attack target 2. The adversary gets a positive reward of 1, the Coast Guard get a negative reward -1. If as a result the Coast Guard were to switch and always protect target 2, now an adversary conducting surveillance will attack target 1. The adversary again gets a positive reward 5, the Coast Guard again get a negative reward -5. So any deterministic strategy an adversary could defeat. If the Coast Guard were to use a mixed strategy, a randomized strategy, so that's 60% of the time they're at target 1 and 40% of the time they're at target 2, an adversary conducting surveillance will only know that the Coast Guard are here 60%, there 40%, but what they will do tomorrow remains unpredictable. The goal here is to come up with a mixed strategy, a randomized policy that increases the cost and uncertainty to an attacker in coming up with a plan of attack. We are not guaranteeing 100% security because there is no such thing in the real world. We are optimizing the use of our limited security resources. Now these kinds of games are called Stackelberg games because security resources commit first, defenders commit first, the adversary observes and then responds. What we are looking for is a Stackelberg equilibrium. For a 2x2 game, you can solve this by hand. Should it be a 60-40 allocation? Should it be a 70-30 allocation? But when there are trillions of possible patrolling strategies and a large number of targets, solving these problems by hand becomes difficult. And that's where our research comes in. So our research has been in solving massive scale games under uncertainty. And this has led to a number of applications on infrastructure security. So our work, I guess it is in use for infrastructure security. For example, by the US Coast Guard in generating patrols in ports such as Boston and New York and Los Angeles, as well as generating patrols around the Staten Island Ferry. In all of these cases, a Stackelberg game formulation is used to generate these strategies. Our work is also used by the TSA to assign air marshals to flights on a randomized basis. So again, using a Stackelberg game model to generate these mixed strategies. All of this work started by earlier work at the LAX airport, where the idea was generating randomized patrols on terminals or checkpoints. Our work has also been tested by the LA Sheriff's Department, and this is for trying to suppress crime on trains. So this was the past work, which I will not focus on much today. Where we are going with this is green security. And so you've arrived at exactly the right time, Eric. So
Milan knows I know his old work.
So here with green security, we are focused on protection of forest, fish, and wildlife. For example, with the Coast Guard, our focus is generating patrols in the Gulf of Mexico to try to deter illegal fishing. With IBM, it is for cleaner rivers in India. This is for inspections of factories that pollute water. With Panthera and WWF, and so these are two NGOs, and that will be primarily the focus of my talk today. It's for optimally generating patrols based on past poaching data and so forth to protect endangered species. What's new here is the fact that there is a large amount of adversary behavior data. Unfortunately, there's a lot of poaching, a lot of illegal fishing, which provides us the data on the basis of which we can learn adversary models. And this then becomes a repeated game. We can learn these models to improve our game playing strategies, and when they attack again, we can continually improve our strategies. Here we are also able to incorporate or need to incorporate insights from conservation biology. And so have collaboration from somebody like Lucas or other conservation biologists would be very valuable or is very valuable. And so similarly for criminology. In fact, there's a conference that we've been organizing, C4 Conference for Conservation, Criminology, and Computation, which tries to bring together these interdisciplinary insights. There is a newer domain that we've also worked on, which is urban crime. And here there is a lot of data. So this is area around USC, for example, where the problem is more low-level crime, as in people stealing laptops and cell phones and so on. Here we can start with a clean slate and learn an adversary model from scratch from data, because there's a lot of data. People report crime. So we have infrastructure security games where we have fortunately limited numbers of attacks and data, where we have to rely more on expert knowledge. To green security, where there is medium amount of data, let's say, because we have silent victim problems. Animals are not calling in saying there's poaching attacks going on. And so this leads to some fundamental challenges in the fact that data are biased, the fact that we have to have a trade-off in exploration and exploitation. And opportunistic crime then, of course, extends it to situations where there's a lot more data. More recently, I guess us, and I'm sure others too, face a lot of pressure from funding agencies to move all these techniques towards cybersecurity. And so that's one of the newer areas of research. So this gives an overview of the work that we've been doing in this area of security games. It's a highly interdisciplinary space. USC was kind enough to do a magazine article on our work outlining, and one of the things they produced was this map outlining all the places where our work is deployed, and particularly with the use of, with the collaboration of non-governmental organization, you can see that some of this work now is getting deployed outside the US. And some of our collaborators are deploying this work in other parts of the world as well.
I like the moniker there, Melanton-based armor and its many iterations.
Yes. And, but this is only possible because of the interdisciplinary collaboration with law enforcement agencies. So we've really had to embed ourselves. You know, Faye and Thine and everybody else have gone trying to understand problems locally, and then based on that, try to embed those constraints in the solutions. Along the way, for example, they've had to learn new kinds of cutting plane algorithms that they didn't imagine they would learn as part of their computer science training.
So would you comment a little bit about domain specificity in terms of the learnings and the intensity of effort versus the general principles that you rely upon that you can share among the applications?
Yes. So, I mean, we are very much focused on this use-inspired research. And so there are so many instances where the domain provides us a new kind of a problem, and then it generalizes to many other domains. But when you encounter that kind of a domain for the first time, it throws open a completely new type of a problem that we hadn't encountered before, and then you generalize. So it's very much we like to think of it very much the classic use-inspired research, where you start from a problem, you try to find a solution, and in that you recognize a general principle that applies to many other domains, but that also solves the problem at hand. Not everything is like that. Clearly, sometimes it's just the problem that works in this domain. But this has been a repeated occurrence, and there are sometimes theorems that people are able to prove that would be wonderful if only the domain constraints could just go away. So for example, here's a theorem that would apply, would speed up all our computation if the air marshals would only have even numbered cycles. That is to say, they would not intervene in hijacking on odd cycled flights or something like that. So if okay, returning from from New York to
solution, half the flight solution.
And so it's very interesting. I think we've learned a lot in terms of really understanding that the domain really constrains the solution space and the problem space. So to put all our cards on the table, we also have a startup, ARMORWAY, that has is now run by several of my former PhD students, and it's growing. Things are there's a lot of it's a very exciting time in terms of where all of this research and applications are going.
Jumping to another domain just before you move on to the
Sure.
green, staying non-green for a little bit. Looked at phishing attacks and some of the online cybersecurity issues from the point of view of your methods.
So
While you're here, we did visit Redmond, to meet with some of the fishing experts and so on.
I would
Even
love
the
to.
PH, not the wildlife fishing.
Yes. I would really love to do that. I would be really.
I'm curious if it's formulated as adversarial.
Yes, so I haven't done it, but my one of my former postdocs, or two of my former postdocs actually, they've formulated some of these problems in this framework, and they're going after these problems. I would love to really go after this because.
Yeah, so I was going to see. Well, yeah.
We can give up a list of names before you run out. You should have some white space on your schedule so you can meet some of these folks that do this kind of.
I would love to do that. I would be. We have actually, as I was saying, we're getting pushed to say you got to move to cyber if you want more funding, essentially, in some of these cases, and so that's the way it's been working, and so that's.
Well, maybe, but of course, as opposed to going there because that's where the interest is. If we can formulate those challenges in a way that would make sense for the.
That's right. So obviously, we are interested in the fundamental algorithmic advances that we can make. We are interested in the domains as well, but hopefully, what we will find is that the principles will apply. Please.
Can I just get a little context? And I apologize if this came up already. But it seems to me that this whole model is dependent on kind of the stupidity of your adversaries. Right? It's in their interest to be as random as possible within their domain. And if they're random, then you can't do anything better than be random.
No. So I think, so the way I explained it in the beginning is that we are assuming the adversary is actually in early part of this work, is that the adversary is rational. They are very observant. They know exactly the patrolling strategies, the mixed strategies that you're playing, and then they choose from their perspective what's in their best interest to attack. And so they are just picking. So it's like, what we are doing is we are playing some kind of randomized strategy. They are observing what you're doing, and they'll pick that one spot which is the best for them, which happens usually to be the worst for us. And so that's the way the game gets played. So they're not playing a randomized strategy.
Isn't the equilibrium for both to be random here?
No, in a Stackelberg game, the defender plays a mixed strategy, and the adversary's pure strategy response is optimal. So the adversary's job is really very simple in this model, which is look at the patrolling strategy of the defender and find that one place where you can attack and get the best possible result for yourself. And so it's a fairly different model compared to a simultaneous move game model. The computational complexity here is polynomial time compared to, so there's a unique equilibrium as opposed to having to worry about multiple equilibria. So this model offers some advantages over the normal sort of simultaneous move game Nash equilibrium type solution.
Going to this domain of airports and airport security, we can define the problem in this scope of the LAX airport, but for a tourist point of view, it's actually a bigger game, right? If LAX is really well protected, you can target another airport. Have you looked into this kind of interaction between these agencies and how making one thing more secure may deviate to another one?
Right. So I completely agree that that really there is a bigger game that is being played. We've thought about it on a national scale. How would you go about doing these things? It's not something that we've had access to in terms of saying here, our algorithms are actually deployed on a national scale for all of the airports or something like that. So that's something that would be interesting to do. There's no opposition from us to think about it in that way, but it's just something that hasn't been given to us as a problem to think about. So let me move on to infrastructure security. And I know that, it's great we are having an interactive session. So I'll try to just speed things along a little bit because I do have a lot to cover.
You have to until noon, right? So.
Oh, okay, that's good.
So that's why we like to promote discussion as well.
That's good. That's good.
We're just going to keep you here all day.
That's fine too. That's fine too. So I guess the longest lecture I've given is 9 hours. So this was each guy's summer school in Beijing. They kept us for 9 hours each. So morning 9, the evening 6 lecture. That's true. That's true. That's true. So let me start with infrastructure security. So here I'll just highlight one piece of work that we've done just to give you a flavor for how this work gets done. It's PROTECT, which is we've built for the US Coast Guard. PROTECT is an acronym of the system. So you can see we spend a lot of time trying to come up with good acronyms. So this is a decision aid built for the Coast Guard to generate randomized patrols in ports, taking into account the values of different targets. And it's deployed in Boston and New York and Los Angeles and maybe going towards other ports in the country as well. What the Coast Guard are worried about are attacks of this type, but also less serious attacks that might happen. In 2011, the system initially was deployed in Boston, at which point they made a nice video for us after they evaluated the implementation to be a success, and they have some criteria for how they evaluated it. They made a nice video. I'll play a 30-second clip from that video.
More focused upon providing effective presence, reducing predictability, and enhancing the safety and security within our ports. PROTECT guided patrols became a source of pride for Station Boston crews, and it doesn't get much better than that. PROTECT has also had other positive side effects, such as the development of better tactics, techniques, and procedures. The results have been exceptional.
And so beyond the first application for port patrols was generating patrols around the Staten Island Ferry. And this is work of Fei Fang as part of her PhD thesis. And so carrying 60,000 passengers a day, the threat is somebody ramming a boat into the ferry. So the Coast Guard run these patrols around the ferry. These are actually our algorithms at work, actually part of Fei's thesis. And so it has completely and radically changed how they used to run these patrols before. And so sometimes when public appreciates the patrols and so forth, it's good for the Coast Guard and also good for us. I'm going to explain how we generate these patrols just to give a flavor for how this works. There's a discrete space-time representation that I'm going to use. There's actually a continuous time version of this, which is published in the Journal of AI Research, 2013. But I'll use the discrete space-time version because it's easier to explain in the time that we have available. So here we have 3 locations, A, B, C, and 3 time points, 5, 10, and 15 minutes. And we have this ferry, which is jumping from C at 5 minutes to B at 10 minutes to A at 15 minutes. Each of these red boxed locations are places where an adversary could attack. To protect this ferry, we can run different patrols. We can run a green patrol going from B at 5 minutes to C at 10 minutes to a B at 15 minutes, for example. A patrol boat can protect the ferry right next to it, as shown by the red arrow. So now we can try to run a minimax algorithm. This is a linear program that just tries to minimize the adversary's maximum expected utility by generating probabilities of each of the R routes that we have. And so we can solve this problem. We can get a solution which gives a probability distribution over all of the different routes. So it's saying, well, probability of brown route is 0.17, green is 0.13, et cetera, et cetera. This could work, but there are n to the power t variables here, n being the number of locations, t being the total number of time slices. because they're exponential numbers of patrol routes if you look at it this way.
In these solutions, do you make the assumption that the sensing action is not observable by the adversary? In other words, if let's say preparation to sense was observable, and therefore an adversary with continual monitoring ability could make decisions based on the ability to sense, prep to sense by the protector, would that just disrupt the intent of the algorithm?
So the algorithm's intent is that I guess the assumption is that the adversary has complete knowledge of the overall probabilities of patrols. So they have past surveillance, they have done all of this, they know generally how these, how your patrol probabilities work. They have complete information about but what they don't have is online information saying, right now, where is your patrol boat?
Right, I guess it'd be interesting to characterize the real world centric assumptions that are made in terms of adversaries' information gathering ability, in terms of the details of thwarting versus executing an attack in light of the dynamics of preparation and temporal properties of the protection. Where to imagine that the adversary could do online observation of some aspects of what it takes to do the, nothing's instantaneous, right? So there's a temporal progression of a protection action. And so how that would
so the idea here is not so much, so we are not trying to disrupt the adversary online by observing where the adversary is at this point in time. What we are trying
I meant the other way around. Adversary has the ability to observe the temporal aspects of like say the protecting Coast Guard boat coming out of its garage and where it's housed and starting out to do the surveillance, and they can just watch continually that action and wait till that doesn't happen before they engage their attack, given that it's not, we're talking about windows of time, intervals, preparatory phases. And so whenever I see this kind of solution, I always wonder about the richness of the real world giving adversaries all sorts of rich surfaces to attack that thwart the assumptions of the analytical approach, even though it's beautiful in terms of how.
Right. So I guess that's a great question and something that we repeated always after ask So the basic assumption here is that we are optimizing limited resources, and the assumption also is that the adversary has perfect information about your probabilities of patrols beforehand. But online, that they're right. Yeah. So they've planned. So the idea is something like this: that they are observing everything, they have perfect knowledge, and they're going to plan an attack at a certain time, certain place, because it's not something that they can sort of do a dynamic planning on. That's the
is that whatever they do, they have to sort of plan, and they can't abort easily. So that they actually plan and they commit.
Right.
Ahead of time, like this can happen on 9/11 at 9:13 a.m. on this plane, and so they have the same problems we do with committing to a tugboat going out at time T.
And if obviously if they abort their attack, that's good. But if but
what if they abort it every single time at low cost, and they just wait till in online.
So the online thing is the more interesting aspect, which is what more recent papers have started to go after, to say, okay, if you now allow the adversary to have some online sensing, can you improve your plans? And so that's something also we've been thinking about and modifying it. But at some point, yes. I mean, if you allow for the adversary to also have perfect online sense, because here we are saying, well, the adversary has perfect offline sensing. If you now say, well, they also in addition have
even noisy online and some resource to expend on monitoring and aborting.
So if you allow for some partial online, it's okay. I guess obviously the trouble becomes if you have perfect online and the instantaneous attack, then you can't really do anything. Then it's So you need to have
more iron shields for your boats.
right. So you need that. I mean, there needs to be some limitations on adversaries' capabilities for us to be able to protect based on what we have. Otherwise, there's really nothing you can really do.
Again, I don't want to stop the talk and say it wasn't a hard problem, but if many of these situations are of the form adversary figures out when stuff is deployed and can wait until stuff is not deployed to do their action without a lot of planning, without a lot of infrastructure, which typifies terrorism, sort of lightweight, nasty attacks.
But I guess that, it depends, right? If you are thinking about something that's pre-planned, that's carried out as a big attack, then normally, the way I've read incidents and so forth, there's careful planning, and it can't be something where you sort of do it on the fly opportunistically.
Your methods might create pressure to evolve those techniques.
Right. And the more, so the idea is, right in the beginning, as I said, we are not guaranteeing 100%. All we are trying to do is to increase the cost and uncertainty to an attacker in coming up with a plan of attack. So if we now put pressure on them that they can't plan so easily, if they have to have much more coordination and all of this, then that's what we've achieved. Because given limited resources, there's really, you cannot guarantee 100%. And so going back to this, the main idea here is that there's exponential numbers of routes. So now, if you can focus on individual segments of these routes and take the probabilities on these, take the two segments, the green segment and the brown segment, supposing, and put it together into a single probability variable. Take the blue segments and put that into a single probability variable. Now you are generating probabilities over these marginals and marginal probability flows. And you have n squared multiplied by t variables rather than the n to the power t variables. And we can now scale up and generate the probabilities that you want by sampling from these marginals directly. And so this is a way in which we can scale up to solve these big problems. So there's one technique. There are many other techniques, and if I have time, I'll come to some of these later on. So this is a small clip from
Southern California to utilize game theory as a way of optimizing and scheduling our patrol. Makes it harder for somebody to anticipate where the patrols will be. So even though we're having to slide back operations a bit, what we're working on is ideas that will allow scheduling that gives the appearance that we're out there a lot more than what we are, because it puts the boat in the right place.
So this is just showing off that some of our work has been mentioned in congressional testimonies. So we've spent a lot of time. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there's papers at AAA and ICHCA and so forth. So they do their normal evaluations of algorithms and so forth. Several of you are very familiar with that. But given that the work is deployed in the real world, it's important for us to also evaluate how this is performed in the real world. And the focus of our evaluation there is, does game theory lead to an improved performance over how things used to be done before in terms of optimizing these limited resources? So we've certainly done evaluations in the lab to that end, bringing in human subjects and simulations. We've gone out in the field and looked at patrol quality before and after our system was deployed, or running human versus game theory competitions. Who does a better job producing unpredictable patrols? Who does a better job covering the right kinds of targets? And shown that game theoretic approaches have led to better performance. And then, to the extent possible, field evaluation against real adversaries. And this usually is only possible when the consequences of an attack are low. So for example, we've done tests on LA's metro rail system looking at fare evaders, catching fare evaders. So this was done over 21 days of patrol, keeping conditions as identical as possible. On the one side, using game theoretic approaches. On the other side, humans were given uniform random approaches, but they could interrupt them and go after fare evaders wherever they felt they had the highest chance of catching fare evaders. And shown that if you look at capture rate per 30 minutes, that the game theoretic schedules led to a higher rate of capture.
Did you try a pure random attack that didn't have the human element?
So we couldn't, because essentially this is real world trials, and these are real officers doing real tests, and there's just no way to say, well, you have to exactly follow this and this only, because they know they can catch more Ferry evaders, so they just said, well, we are going to go after that.
On the game theory side, you're telling them to follow this strategy only?
So what we tell them is that even there, you can interrupt the schedule if you don't like what's in hand and go anywhere you want. And so what we found is that, so actually they didn't know what was what. They just got a schedule on a phone, and they had to follow, if you don't like it, go somewhere else and catch more Ferry evaders. And right. But it's just that they always interrupted the uniform random one, and they never interrupted the game theory one. And so that's just the way it was run. Everything was kept, they didn't know what was what. They just had a schedule on the phone.
So they didn't interrupt the game theory.
They did not interrupt the game theory.
Of
They always
of their own.
Right.
Decision.
So we just had, they had the schedule on the phone. They had to go and just follow, or if they didn't follow, then go somewhere else, and the phone would note wherever they went and caught more Ferry evaders. That was the whole experiment. And it was not possible to say, well, you must follow exactly what we tell you to do. So this is just what was done previously, and originally my plan was this would get done by 10:50, but that's okay. We are just slightly off schedule. So I'll move on to green security games, which is the main topic of today's talk. Now, so we'll get as much as we can get through, and you can tell me when you've had enough, and we can stop there. I can go for 9 hours, as I mentioned. So we'll start with talking about the work we did with the U.S. Coast Guard. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, work with the U.S. Coast Guard. This is generating patrols against illegal fishing. We generated these patrols. The software is with the Coast Guard. It's under evaluation. More recently, we've started working for forest protection. This is with Michigan, our colleagues at Michigan State University and an NGO in Madagascar. And the idea here is, again, trying to protect forests from illegal logging. Another project that we're working on is inspecting factories that pollute rivers. And in particular, important rivers like the Ganga River. And here with IBM, the idea is, can we inform the inspectors in using past data and so forth, where to do these randomized inspections. But the work I'll really focus on for today's talk is the work for protecting endangered wildlife. We have many collaborations around the world. One, for example, is with the Wildlife Conservation Society in Uganda. So this is Murchison Falls National Park in Uganda. Perhaps some of you have been there. Maybe Lucas, you've been there. Absolutely a wonderful place. I was there last fall, and really, really breathtaking in terms of the animals and so forth that you see there. But there's threat to the wildlife. The picture in the middle there is a snare. So the way this works is that it opens up and it's buried in the ground, and when an animal steps on it, it closes and traps the animal, and then the poacher comes and kills it. We were told that there are elephants who walk around in the park with their trunks cut off and so forth because of this. To the right are pictures of wire snares. There's thousands of snares, and that's just from 2014. The picture on the left is me with the head of security at the park. So the way they conduct patrols there is that they'll send out patrols for some months, collect data on wildlife, on snares that they can find, bring all the data back to headquarters, analyze the data, and send out patrols again. So we can cast the problem based on this, inspired by this sort of an idea. We've cast the problem as a repeated Stackelberg game. And so you can look at it in terms of the park, in terms of a grid structure where each grid cell is a target, targets where there's more water, more animals, higher weight, higher value. And so we are going to start by a defender now calculating a randomized patrol strategy on this game board. when they execute randomized patrols for several months and poachers attack targets, we get crime data. From this crime data, we can learn something about the adversaries' decision making, because we are assuming now the adversaries are not acting with perfect rationality, but we are trying to learn their decision making model, their bounded rationality model, which is then going to feed into our calculation of a mixed strategy. And so this is quite different from the earlier work on infrastructure security, because now we have attack data which allows us to learn something about our adversaries and improve our decision making in terms of calculating randomized patrols. So I'm going to now outline some of the research challenges and our solutions. This is, as I said, new work that's ongoing, so there's lots more to do. I'll start by looking at the bounded rationality models and the algorithms that need to be generated for that. And so obviously we are getting data from the field, and I'll show you some results from that data. But to speed up data collection, we also have constructed a poaching game. So this is an online game where people play for real money. This is played on MTurk. And this is a forest area where we've divided up the forest into grid cells. Grid cells with higher levels of green are patrolled less frequently. Adversaries can attack without the probability of high probability of being captured. Red are areas where they're patrolled more frequently. The number of animals, number of hippos in a cell is related to the value of that cell. We chose hippos because they are non-charismatic species, so people will not feel as bad poaching. And people are acting as poachers, and the algorithm is acting as, is generating the different patrolling strategies here. So people can go to different locations. There's a, success if they're successful, they get a certain reward. If they fail, they get a certain penalty. They can see the probability of success and failure. If they go to a location, they succeed, they get real money. If they go to a location, their snaring fails, they lose money. And so we've been playing these sorts of games with people for many years now, collecting lots of data. Now, normally, if we assume a game theoretic rational player, what we would assume is that everybody is calculating expected utility, and then, so this is just the capture probability multiplied by penalty plus the not capture probability multiplied by reward. And everybody would go to one cell and we'll find all attacks in that one cell, or maybe just around it. But what happens in reality is that the attacks are spread all over. And the model that we found that better fits how people are acting is this Quantal response model. What this is stochastic choice model. Cells with higher expected utility, people are more likely to attack. Cells with lower expected utility, people are less likely to attack, but the probability is not zero. If we use this model, of course, that leads to a non-convex nonlinear optimization problem, and solving these once you get past that and come up with a defender strategy. So we are assuming that the adversaries are acting according to this Quantal response model.
The Quantal response? I guess we have to read McFadden's article on that.
Yeah, so I guess, and there's a long history, it goes back to Luce and in 1960 and so forth. But I guess, McFadden got a Nobel Prize for some of this work. So this is all sort of rooted. Now it's sort of invaded game theory, and there's a lot more work on kind of different Quantal response models and so forth. But this is, this is one point of origin. Some people actually cite Luce and go back even more to random utility models and so forth. So if we assume that the adversary is acting according to Quantal response and generate our strategies according to that and play against humans, it turns out that we perform better. These are just 4 of the games that we've played. On the y-axis is defender expected reward. On the x-axis of 4 different games. Lower is worse, higher is better. If we assume adversaries are acting according to assuming perfectly rational, we get the blue bar, which is the worst performing bar. Epsilon rationality is green, Quantal response leads to red. So assuming that the adversaries are acting according to Quantal response leads to better performance for the defender. We can do, go on.
The adversaries can be dynamic, but you have to be fixed.
We have to be fixed. The adversaries then choose a particular location to attack, knowing the probability of where we are patrolling.
They can come back the next day and do the same thing. You can't change.
So in this case, it's a one-shot game. So in this case, we are just playing once and that's it. In Thine's PhD thesis, she figured out that there's a better way, improvement over Quantal response that's possible, which is subjective utility Quantal response. So we are looking at each target. It seems like we could model people as though they're looking at each target capture probability, reward, and penalty as some sort of features of that target. And then you take a weighted sum. The weights are learned from past attack data, and then use that subjective utility to generate a subjective utility quantal response model. And in human subject experiments and playing against humans, assuming they're playing subjective utility quantal response, leads to better performance. But this is all lab data. More recently, we got data from Uganda, 17 years of data. And this is showing a fit of the model that we have to the data from Uganda on poaching attacks. These are ROC curves. And the main thing we want to know here is that going to this corner is better, as we know. And you can see that SUQR, which is shown in blue, is significantly better than quantal response and other models that we could think of. Now, Thine has been working on improving the model. Go ahead.
Which is the actual data? These are predicted. The other ones, the blue and red, are predicted.
So basically, we've learned from, let's say, past years, and then we are trying to predict for next year. So we may have, so this is like from training, we have learned about, our models' weights, and then on testing, we are testing, predicting.
So I guess if you were to fit the data that you had using either the quantal response or the SUQR response, which one is a better fit?
So the blue is a better fit. The more you go towards here, the better it is.
That's basically people that are caught versus get through, right?
So
in this model, the true positives are catching folks.
Right. And so we are trying to predict poaching attacks, and so
to get them up. I'm sorry. Are you done?
I'm done.
Oh, I was just interested to know to use a Bayesian model to get the subjective. How do you generate the subjective utility? Sorry, the subjective probability on the way to utility. I can see, like, for example, really rich models that use features like availability bias, like my cousin was caught in that region, and that really sticks in my mind. It makes it higher. You can imagine, like, people amplify recency, for example. And
so that's I'm going to there. I'm going there. That's wonderful. So this is and Thine is working with, and this is our partly our collaboration with Lucas. But so this is assuming a single adversary type, meaning everybody has the same weights.
This is capturing notions like risk averse, risk loving. Like, for a bigger reward, I'm willing to take some risk versus a very conservative poacher that is trying to minimize risk.
So we haven't yet gone there. I mean, what we have done is taking all the animals to be the same value right now. Just learn the weights from the data.
You're being caught for like 3 weeks in jail or something.
Right, and so we've just, there's a lot more to be done in terms of and there's all kinds of features in the domain, slope of the land, the vegetation cover, all kinds of things like that. And what Thine is doing right now, to give away some of where she's going, is, well, the observations are not perfect, so we really need to model observational uncertainty. So all of that is yet to be done.
I can imagine a really rich dissertation, maybe it's the topic already, on just using the basic standard quantal response model and looking at inducing the human probabilities based on sets of features, and like notions like from the actual logs of what is a model of what somebody has heard about in the news about where someone's caught, for example. Mm-hmm. And can you compute whether somebody's family member was somebody they would know on a social graph, would know about them being caught in grid cell X, IJ, and actually showing how these, what the actual landscape of the cognitive assessments are versus the actual probabilities, which also have an influence too, because they say that, well, people, if they were ideal, they would learn the actual probabilities, but they're not going to do that. They're going to have their own model of this. And things like recency are very important, I think.
Biases also.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things.
This model is assuming that they are observing what
perfectly.
The guards are doing
perfectly.
Yeah.
Whereas people are going to have some kind of a local or biased knowledge.
That's true.
Yeah, and if you ask them, like, what's the problem? If you actually could have called to get one of these poachers and show them the grid or show them the land and say, give me your probability of being caught in these places, and then you post a news story about, like, real story. Person X was caught, running with a tiger, in this area. It's like, okay, now reassess and see how the sense things you can sense about things that people could see could be used to model what people would think.
And so you can see why we are so, this is an important area, and why we are so excited about all the different ways in which this can be extended. So one way in which we thought it could be extended is by going from SUQR to Bayesian SUQR, where we allow for different groups of people to have different weights.
Well, let me ask you a question. I assumed UQR was Bayesian. What do you mean by non-Bayesian versions of that?
In the sense that there is a single adversary type, in the sense that...
How do you come up with that estimate?
Of the weights from past attack data. So we look at, let's say, you may have, we have 17 years of data. In this...
Not the... So you actually use past attack data to induce a probability?
To look at the weights.
The weights.
And based on those weights, then we get the probability of attack.
I see. So the weights are basically ways to weight the probability based on what they did. I see. Yeah, no, I like the Bayesian idea.
Okay, so that's what we did.
No secret.
Okay, yeah. So that's what we did next. So now we say there's a heterogeneous population of poachers. We learn different groups of weights. And now we want to go from one-shot games to repeated games. And right now we're playing this on Amazon, on MTurk again. And so our thought was SUQR is good, clearly beat people in single-shot game. Bayesian SUQR must be even better. And so we played repeated games. This is not easy on MTurk. So we have to chase people. So for every game, 40 people we recruited and chased them by sending many, many emails. Please come back, play this game. Please come back, play this game. So this is what we call a longitudinal study, in the sense it's 35 weeks where we chased 40 people to play this game again and again and again. And my student, Debarun, sent 10,000 emails in the process to get people to come back and play this game again. This is what it took. And at the end of it, so we wanted to show that a learning SUQR model, one where we learned, would do significantly better than a non-learning model. And so these are rounds of the game on the x-axis, defender expected utility on the y-axis. Lower is worse, higher is better. Maxim is the most simple strategy we could think of. No learning, nothing. And what we found is that our SUQR model performed worse than Maximin, and Bayesian SUQR performed far worse and never recovered. And so there's something, so eventually SUQR kind of learns and settles and improves over Maximin, but round 2, clearly it is much worse. And so there's something missing in the process. And so we were trying to understand why is it in one-shot games we were doing so well, and as soon as we went to repeated games, things started falling apart. And what we found out is that people will do what we'll call superstitious learning, as it is known in the psychological literature. Essentially, there may be something, they may have made a really good choice, a great place to attack in terms of expected utility. They go there, by random chance, this is randomized patrolling, they get caught. Then they say, well, this was not a good place to attack, let me go somewhere else. And they may have made an error, they may have gone to a wrong place, but by random chance they succeeded. They'll say, well, this is a really great place, let me come back here again. And so, in a sense, they get this kind of reinforcement, which we can model by essentially increasing or decreasing subjective utility from the last round. So we are now bumping up this subjective utility based on whether they succeeded or failed, rather than where they attacked, which was what we had used in the past.
So I'm not getting confused. So a true Bayesian subjective utility would actually have models of these strange biases. You'd actually put distinctions in about things like recency and superstitiousness. This is what I mean by Bayesian. Like it's like this. Okay. When I have a rich Bayesian model of what people are doing, and it might be a very, very deep model that gets into things like this idea of availability and bias by experience. And I'm surprised that that's doing worse for defender utility.
So I should say that our terminology of Bayesian SUQR is basically, Bayesian as in, we have Bayesian games, so we have adversary types. And so we are saying there's different kinds of adversary types. And so that's what, but we haven't, I mean, what this is saying is that there's an additional effect over and above that simple characterization of types as simply being characterized by different weights for different populations or something like that. We need to have an additional phenomenon that we had not captured before.
So where did the weights come from?
So we are learning from data.
Okay, so actually by Bayesian, you mean you don't marginalize all data to a single adversary type. You actually allow given experiences, but it's still being done coherently versus this idea, we'll call it, for now, given that you're calling that Bayesian, human cognitive subject, SUQR.
Yes.
And I would basically refer to that as the Bayesian approach. So anyway, but you meant probabilistically sound with separate groups based on keyhole views into where things have happened.
Right.
Yeah.
And go on.
It is like the overfitting problem in machine learning. You're trying to represent some complex phenomenon with simple representations, and when you overfit to that, then the performance gets worse after some point. I wonder, it's like that kind of...
Or I guess one thing what we are saying is that there's an additional phenomena that we had not taken into account, which certainly is not in the behavioral game theory literature as far as we are aware, to take this additional phenomenon into account. I mean, obviously people are getting reinforced, that we know, but this is saying this is embedded on top of the quantum response model. And that, once we do that, then it improves performance. So in a sense, we are saying, yes, there is some truth to the quantum response model. Everything is good. So that's the one where we take the SUQR and add this bumping up and down of subjective utilities based on proportion of people succeeded or failed.
So that's what I call the Bayesian, but interesting.
I mean,
so what I meant by dissertation, I meant like that to understand the actual foundations of the cognitive model based on repeat exposures to evidence would be a really rich, beautiful piece of work. In other words, so the SHARP model.
Which, it's an acronym. We love acronyms. So it's not. There's a more spelled out name to it. But in any event, the point is that it is taking the subjective utility model and saying, well, we are going to increase and decrease it based on the experiences people had.
Right. So it'd be really nice to featurize the space from the point of view of a lot of observational features, recency of various events, how many might be scale notions of counts of experiences and what would be cognitively salient, and build like a Bayes net and see what would happen even beyond weights going up and down. It sounds heuristic right now.
Yes.
So I just think it was a really great opportunity to make those black lines even higher there.
Again, some of it, not all of it, some of it is in Thyn's work that we were doing with Lucas now, but there's a lot more. I completely agree. There's a lot more. There's a big
What's exciting about it is that I'm not sure what the literature is like these days in modern versions of probability assessment with humans about like the almanac games we can play. But for kind of a repeat game situation with a rich, relatively static frame like poaching in these grid cells, it'd be really nice to see the models you can display out with just lots of data and how people believe by doing the assessment. We can do this on Turk too, probably with this environment. So maybe we actually have data we can actually play with, from the Turk games, and see if we can build a Bayes net that does complements or what we've done.
And so let me push ahead because I do want to.
This also is you learn about people and how they overreact and what their biases are to events in the world. What are most memorable? A lot of it would be kind of like a Bayesian approach to the Tversky and Kahneman literature, and say, okay, we have these distinctions, and now we're going to build a model that predicts probabilities.
So now I want to tell you something about Kahneman and Tversky. This model SHARP, in our experiments, people's probability perception, we found, is exact opposite of how it's stated in prospect theory. So we are not sure what's going on completely, but what the data shows is that in their model, Basically, people overweigh low probability and underweigh high probability. In our experiments, it's flipped. People underweigh low probability. So it's like 0.2 probability, I don't care, I'm going in. 0.6, oh, that's a lot, I'm not going in.
It could be a couple things, right? So it could be, and to take a longer discussion and deep dive, but it could be how you're representing risk aversion. You might have people with a short timeline, they're taking risks, they're not being risk neutral, and so that could explain some of those edge effects. Prospect theory gets into also not just the way belief is handled, but it's, in my mind, more about the overweighting people give to utility and underweighting, where losing utility is much more painful.
Yes.
On the scalar scale, absolute scale, than gaining the same amount back. So
I also wonder, this game is a lot more complex than most games that psychologists work with in their experiments.
I know, it's really rich, that's why it's exciting.
Yeah, it is big, it has a lot of probabilities, it is sequential, so there's coming back. I wonder if people are following some strategies to make the problem simpler in their minds, kind of cut off parts of the state space, like that probability is small, I'm not going to worry about it, that probability is large, I'm going to focus there, to kind of make the problem complex and manageable for them. And if the problem was simpler, maybe this effect on probabilities would be significantly different.
And I think this is very interesting because the context of how experiments were done in the past versus this this is what our psychology friends tell us, that might be the source of the explanation.
But imagine following up on AJ's sort of ideas and having enough data to say, here's a rich new cognitive model about how people deal with the bounded memory and state space pruning, and you can actually, by building a structural model, generate human-like probabilities given exposures. This would be like we should do this for a year, just do this.
Yes, great.
They can make the game, make it simpler, make it more complex, change the probability this way, collect the data again and again.
We would love for that to happen.
This is like the kind of thing that would make Josh Tenenbaum drool. It's kind of a model of human, the rationality of probability assessment.
You could also play with how you present information, because you can say 0.2, but you can also do something like the news report, like while they play the game and on Turkey, tell them someone just got caught here. Right? And it's not really a high probability, but they just...
It's very available.
Great idea.
So, spatial reasoning, I'll try to walk through this somewhat more quickly. Oh, good. That's the main point. That's the main point. So this is Andrew Lemieux, our collaborator. He tried this out in Uganda, this pause system, which is generating patrols. And he came back and said, your geography, you need to pay more attention to geography, because we're asking people to walk over water because water bodies had merged and we didn't know about this. Then we started working with Panthera, and this is part of Malaysia. It's a wonderful place. They started patrolling. So this is finding a tiger footprint, a poachers camp along the patrols. But they also came back and said, paths are difficult to follow. So they are in Malaysia, we are in LA, we are having Skype calls, and they're saying that the shortest distance between 2 points is not a straight line. And we are very confused by this. So we went to Malaysia to see what was so special in Malaysia. We did an 8-hour patrol ourselves in the forest. And so this is at the beginning of the patrol, we're so happy. This is me, Faye, and my former postdoc, Bo. 8-hour patrol, ready to go. And you can see at the end of the 8 hours, completely gone. And this is, so this is us in the. I guess it's not playing, but anyway. So this is just it was supposed to show you patrolling, us actually patrolling. But in the process, we figured out what was going wrong, and Faye figured out something very important. And so if you look at it in terms of a 3D view on what was going on, so it'll turn now, I guess it's a little bit dark here, but you can see here there are mountains, and so you can't quite see. But it's a very mountainous region, and so if you ask people to just walk in straight lines, you're asking them to go up and down, and they lose a lot of energy. So what Faye figured out is that in the forest inside, actually there's a hidden street map that people are following. They're following ridge lines. They're following water, riverbeds. And so this hidden street map is what the patrollers are actually following, and we need to grab that and work with that. And so if we look at it in terms of how we can now build a hierarchical game model. So there is a grid structure, but the defender is actually not playing on a grid. They're playing along these patrol paths, this street map, which is made of ridge lines, streams, from which we get a street map, from which we generate the actual patrol routes. And so defenders are choosing paths on the patrol routes. That adversaries, however, are only looking at individual grid cells and attacking on grid cells. So adversaries' action is local. They're not trying to figure out which patrol route you're taking, what probably. They're saying, in my area of interest, how frequently do you come? And I'm going to go based on that, choose my action. And so this is kind of a hierarchical model that we've built and used in PAWS.
Backing up a little bit here, Ken.
Sure.
So I'm surprised that the attacker poacher actions wouldn't also be guided by efficiencies of access the same way that defender patroller is.
They should be. So this is a computational convenience right now for us, meaning that because if we also model the attacker as having this, it just
Same routes, basically.
Yeah, then it's now we are talking about path intersection and so forth, and it's already. I was just going to tell you that this next part, which is handling of uncertainty, shows you some of the complexities, which is part of Thein's thesis, even with this model that we have.
But even if you use the convenience of the grid cell for the attacker, you could take the probability mass of what they're going to do and spread it over the actual paths, right?
That's possibility.
That way you would do the inference and then kind of at least concentrate the probability on the paths.
And so that's good. That's good. So I have 15 minutes. Let me walk through some of this, and I would love.
It's our lunch, right? So we can keep on going.
I would love for this to continue. So
we can't. We have to see everything. So. You and I intended, at least.
So one of the challenges is that we don't have exact information of where the animals are. There's uncertainty, which means that the payoffs have to be modeled with uncertainty. One way to model this uncertainty is interval uncertainty. There may be other ways too. But here, for example, we're saying that the adversary's payoff here is between -4 and -2. We don't know exactly what it is. Now, to solve these problems, one approach is a behavioral minimax regret. And minimax regret is a technique in AI, some of you may know very well. I'm just going to walk you through how this would work and notionally explain how the algorithm works. So the regret of a particular strategy X can be computed in this fashion. We take a sample of the game, so we're just looking at one sample of the payoff. X is the defender strategy. This Q represents adversary's response because they're playing with Quantal response. So now we get a defender expected utility of -0.5. So we've played a strategy, the adversary has responded, we got a defender expected utility. The regret of this strategy X is if we had played the optimal strategy X star, we would have actually gotten a defender expected utility of 0.2. So our regret here is 0.7 because we got -0.5 and we should have gotten 0.2. So that's the regret of this strategy X for this payoff instance. Now, if we were to play this strategy X on another game instance, which is shown here, the same strategy, but on another game instance from the same interval uncertainty that we had, it turns out that the regret has gone up to 1.2 instead of 0.7 because here the optimal strategy would have, the defender's strategies would have given us a utility of -0.9. So going over all possible instances over all of the entire interval, if we can find that one instance, that would give us the maximum regret. That's what we would get as the maximum regret of playing this strategy X over all possible game instances. So we want to find that one strategy X which minimizes our maximum regret over all possible game instances. And so that's what we are after. We are trying to come up with this, solve this optimization problem. We are trying to minimize our regret where X and R are decision variables. This is the utility loss to the defender for playing a strategy X over all possible payoffs that could be sampled. And the only problem here is we could solve this except that there's infinite number of constraints because all possibilities in the space is continuous. So how do we solve these problems? So one way to do this is by iterative constraint generation. So the idea here is we start with the master problem, which is going to solve our minimax regret for some sampled payoff. So it's going to find that one strategy X, which is minimizing maximum regret for some, let's say, 3 sampled payoffs. And it finds this optimal strategy. And using that, now we find an upper bound, which is that payoff which gives us the highest regret given this optimal strategy. We feed that back into the master. And so now we've kind of created a lower bound and an upper bound, and we can keep iterating until the lower bound and upper bound collapse, and we get the optimal, the one that minimizes our maximum regret. In pictures, so we start with the payoff sample, we get an optimal strategy. Now it turns out that this payoff maximizes our regret given that strategy. So now we have these 2 instances, we generate this optimal strategy. This is our lower bound. But now, given this as our strategy, we can generate a payoff that maximizes our regret again. So this is an upper bound. Now we generate a strategy which generates a lower bound to that. And so we keep iterating in this fashion until we converge and there can be no more improvements. And that's our minimax regret. Now, unfortunately, the assumption here is that we have only 2 rows, 2 defender strategies. So this works as long as the number of defender strategies is small. If the number of defender strategies becomes very, very large because there's many, many possible routes in the forest, we need to embed this iterative process in a bigger iterative process. And so this arrow algorithm, which is the behavior minimax regret, is now embedded in another process where incrementally adding new routes. So you generate a few routes, you run this minimax regret, then you add more routes, you generate minimax regret, and you keep doing it until the whole process converges. And so it's sort of this double kind of iteration of convergence that leads to optimal. So it's sort of, initially it'll start with just 2 routes, do minimax regret, then add 1 more route, do minimax regret until there can be no more improvement in the process. So that's.
And again, are you assuming that if someone's on a route in a grid cell, they could inspect and also scare off poacher anywhere in the square?
We are assuming that they have to cover some fraction of the, but other than that, yes, that's what we are assuming, exactly. And so this is PAWS. This is what we have built as the system, and we've handed over to Malaysia. So PAWS has hierarchical modeling, cutting planes, minimax regret. There's more. So Ferry wrote this paper that said, well, we can do more with planning and learning to kind of deceive attackers and so forth, but this is not in the implemented system. It's in regular use in the sense that patrols are going out by Panthera. These are some pictures from those patrols. And this is showing you now one patrol that was planned and how closely it was followed, showing that they are able to follow these patrol routes. This is basic information of the patrol, average trip length, number of patrollers, number of hours per day that they travel. These are some pictures from the patrols. They found a poacher's camp there. And this is we're trying to compare how well these patrols are performing. There's not a perfect comparison, but if you look at how many animal signs per kilometer we're finding, how many human signs per kilometer we are. So this is our patrols, blue and red. Green is what they were previous patrols, but these are not exactly for the same purpose. They were all trying to do a tiger survey. So maybe the animal signs per kilometer found is a more reasonable comparison. This may not be. This is footprint of a tiger, a footprint of something.
This is where animals happen to be walking around. And human signs are assumed.
Poachers making marks, poacher camps, they leave lighters behind, they leave shoes behind.
And why is animal signs important? Because poachers will go there eventually.
But also part of the input that they're optimizing over is a distribution model, an animal distribution model that's built off of animal preservation.
Well, certainly the animal distribution models cross with the ease of access should be in the probability, adversaries probability model, do you think? You think that they learn about animal availability also?
So that is indeed the SUQR has a weight given to animal density per grid cell. So that's where that's coming.
Already? Yeah.
So one of the things that's coming in here that will eventually be coming in here are things like GPS tracks of animals in the park, right? And the thing that's interesting is like these street maps are kind of a proxy for animal movement patterns as well, but not a perfect proxy. And so there's going to be there's an animal street map and there's a human street map, and where those two things intersect are where poachers set snares, basically. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about is saying, okay, well, we have uncertainty in this species distribution model that animals have. I mean, there's uncertainty of the mental model that poachers and rangers have about the true underlying distribution of animals. But that model we have uncertainty about. So we can ask the question of saying, well, we have a potential maximum reward of catching poachers now based off a animal distribution map with current uncertainty. And if we take a little bit off of that expected return on poaching to collect better data on animal signs that will increase that observation map, then 5 steps down, maybe we'll be doing better than we would 5 steps down if we just went for current maximize anti-poaching efforts, right? And so that's this kind of short-term versus long-term data versus poaching observation stuff. That's interesting.
So last couple of slides, what we are hoping for is collaboration with Panthera to go to many different sites that they're active in. And this is under active negotiation and discussion with them, so we will see how that goes. And we have also started working with WWF. So this is a workshop in Indonesia that Tyne went to. So this is Nicole, one of members of our group, and this is a workshop with the rangers and so forth, WCS, WWF, and so on in Indonesia. It was a pause workshop, so Nicole got a sign, everybody got a pause certificate for attending the workshop. And as part of the workshop, Tyne and Nicole went on elephant rides, and I mean, this is because they're trying to protect elephants. But this is another collaboration that's budding, that's moving forward, and we hope also to collaborate with WWF to deploy in Indonesia in the near future. And so that's it, I guess. To summarize, we are moving from infrastructure security games, which is what we were doing in the past, to green security. This opens up a whole new set of research challenges because from single shot games, we are going to repeated games. There's large amounts of repeated attacks, which gives us data, which allows us to build models of human behavior. So this is exciting because we have from behavioral game theory some models. But here now we have real data from poaching from the field. And all of the insights from conservation biology and so forth can now be brought in. So there's a very interesting intersection of conservation, criminology, and computation that's possible here. And modeling attacker-bounded rationality, the fact that they have limited surveillance, they have limited planning, all kinds of things like that are important. And planning, forest paths and all kinds of, and we already discussed many other research challenges here. And so, from our perspective, even though there are global efforts in security games, it's just the beginning. There are many applications from testing in MOOCs to audit games to software testing to modeling diseases and combating diseases that people are working on. We are very thrilled with seeing security games being applied in all these different directions. We are working with the TSA on a newer project for improving airport screening. And so I want to end by thanking our sponsors, our CREATE Homeland Security Center, Army Research Office, TSA, and the US Coast Guard. So thank you. Go ahead.
In this surveillance setting, especially in the forest, is it feasible to have drones?
It is. The thing is, though, I mean, Lucas may have far more information about drones. What I heard in Uganda, in Malaysia and so forth is that there just is not the infrastructure to support drones. But Lucas may have far more information.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, a lot of it is like they're already flying a lot of these missions in Savannah systems where drones make sense because you can actually see stuff. A lot of things, like in Malaysia, you're looking down at a green canopy and there's not much to see. There's a lot of problems with drones, hopefully that's some of which we might solve over the next couple of years, but there's a lot of problems with drones and deploying them in real world situations with people who aren't drone experts and engineers. There's a guy, I mean, you guys, maybe you probably know him, Tom Snitch at Maryland, who's been in the news a lot for working with the Lindenberg Foundation for deploying these kinds of optimal predictive patrols for drone routing. But again, they work in, basically there's like a van like follows this drone. You know, I mean, it's pretty kludgy still. Anyway.
So what are your thoughts, you know, in any of these areas you looked at, you could always invest more in X, Y, or Z. More people, increasing the number of patrols, increasing the number of boats, a new sensor like a drone, and you could turn, there's a really nice opportunity to turn a crank, given your best method you have available, and to stick in a new sensor and return the crank with probability distribution of what you'd see if you use that new sensor, and then compute the value of adding that new sensor or policy or boat or number of patrols change. And we call this like maybe value of enhanced policy, and here's the dollar value, and here's what my crank with my methods as base level being looked at n times would tell us. And so you think that would be a really nice way to provide guidance to agencies.
Right, and we are doing some of that with AVG and so forth in Madagascar, is with our colleagues in Michigan State, which is given a fixed number of dollars, what's the best you can buy in terms of equipment.
Well, that's one thing. Then you say, okay, if I had n more dollars,
incrementally, how much more can you get? So that's
and the cool thing is you have the base apparatus for doing each baseline, and so you can compute value information or value sensing on top of the current policy.
That's a very important point.
I think it'd be very fun to try that out.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that. Okay, go on.
Does the approaches just generalize to reason about it?
So we worked with a conservation drone company. Do you know? Remember the name of it? In the Netherlands, for a while to generate drone routes for them for preference elicitation. You know, where would you fly in order to reduce uncertainty in the forest the most? Things like that. And so we were really hoping for that collaboration to move forward, but it's tough. I mean, it just seems like the infrastructure in many of these countries is just not there. So we heard in some places people say we are not ready, you know, for such things. So it could be, maybe it's a couple of years. I don't know how many more years, but right now it's not there yet.
It's just like, there's cultural sensitivities, obviously, and then there's topography and vegetation. So like Nepal just banned the use of drones, full stop.
For privacy issues?
Yeah, I mean, they take the welfare of their animals and nature very seriously. They don't want anything flying around.
Just in time to not prevent their use for helping with the earthquake over there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's
there's the other side of the problem that the poachers can use the drones as well.
Yeah, so I mean that's it's the, but there's the drone issue in conservation is something that, you know, we've been interested in for a long time. It's kind of blowing up at the moment, but the gap between reality and hype is still significant. I think this kind of work is coming this way. Drones are maturing over here, and probably in a couple of years there will be sustained flights in, you know, certain national parks in South Africa, for instance, daily running optimized patrols, those sorts of things. I think we're within 1 to 2 years of that, but then large deployments, it's going to be.
And there's no doubt so many interesting questions that those, you know, things open up, and so lots of things to think about there too.
Like Vulcan, Paul Allen's organization, they have this Great African Elephant Census that they're basically trying to count all the elephants in Africa by flying missions in manned aircraft
over the continent, right? I mean, of course, they have sampling strategies for trying to infer, but obviously they're desperately interested in how to do this without actually putting people in the air. Everything from image recognition of elephants on the ground to long flight times and things like that, but also being able to build out those routes based off of not necessarily, well, I mean, encounter probabilities, basically, they want to be able to fly. So there's people driving this stuff forward. It's just a bit brutal.
Okay, it's past
Thanks.
12. Thank you for coming. Thank you for a very interesting set of questions. Thank you.